Hi everyone, we're getting close to the end of our course, and today I would like to share with you a tool that you can use to measure how well is your organization progressing towards implementing plain language as a strategic priority. A client recently told us that it was difficult for him to show to his managers that their organization is making progress in implementing plain language in their customer communication. And his question was, what must I show them? If you have a plain language business plan and an implementation schedule, you can monitor and report your progress against that. Remember those SMART objectives that you defined? If you have defined them clearly, you will have measurable evidence that you can use to report on progress. For large organizations, like a large insurance company or a government department that want to implement plain language across all their customer communication, internal as well as external, a maturity model can be a useful tool to make progress visible. That's exactly what a maturity model is, a tool to plot progress towards a goal. This slide shows two examples of what maturity models can look like. The first picture that you see there on the left is the Gartner model of increasing maturity in financial analytics. The Gartner model has 4 progressive levels. Financial analytics progresses from descriptive analytics at the bottom of the scale to prescriptive analytics at the top. At the first level, the analytics can only tell the organization what happened. At the 4th level, the analytics can empower the organization to make it happen. As maturity grows, the value that it unlocks increases, as you can see there on the y-axis, but the difficulty to achieve higher levels also increases, as you can see on the x-axis. The second maturity model, the one on the right, shows increasing maturity in strategic management. It has 5 progressive levels. Progressing from strategic management, that is at the bottom there, level 1, ad hoc and static, to level 5, strategic management that is geared towards continuous improvement. The second model, that's the one on the right, also shows you the different dimensions or the key aspects of strategic management. You see them there: leadership, culture and values, strategic thinking and planning, alignment, performance measurement, performance management, process improvement, and sustainability. So, what could a maturity model for the implementation of plain language as a strategic priority in an organization look like? To develop such a maturity model, you will need to define, firstly, what are the key aspects or the dimensions of plain language implementation? Secondly, what are the strategic objectives for each of these aspects? What do you want to achieve? Then, how many levels of progress do you want to show? And then lastly, what do you expect will happen at each level? What is the outcome of each level for each aspect? Let's now follow these steps. First, we'll define key aspects and strategic objectives. In the preceding modules, we emphasized that the successful implementation of plain language as a strategic priority requires, firstly, a common understanding of what plain language is and the value it could add for the organization, leadership buy-in and a top-down implementation drive with resources, plain language skills and sustainable training, and a consistent process to develop, monitor, and improve communication in plain language. This is where the ISO Plain Language Standard, with its 4 principles and guidelines, come in very handy and will apply. Principle 1, know the users. Principles 2 and 3, customize the communication for the needs of the users. Principle 4, monitor and measure progress and improve continuously. Have a look at the strategic objectives of each of these aspects. I'm not going to read them out. Take your time and go through them. See if you agree with them. See if there are others that you would like to add or some that you want to take out. And now we will move to the levels. In the literature, one finds 2 types of maturity level descriptors. Personifications, like couch potato to Olympic athlete or novice to expert, and progressively more positive actions, like you saw in those 2 examples, from descriptive to prescriptive, from ad hoc and static to continuous improvement. The personifications have the advantage that it could become aspirational and also encourage healthy competition in an organization. The disadvantage is that people tend to rate themselves higher than their actual level, because nobody wants to be a couch potato, at least not in this context. They might also lose sight of the purpose of the whole exercise. So, what labels would be appropriate for a plain language maturity model? We really thought very hard about that. And in the end, we reasoned that since user-centeredness is the essence of plain language, it would make sense that the level labels speak to that. So we chose level names to constantly remind communicators of user-centeredness, the essence of plain language. And they are progressively more positive. At the bottom level, the user is ignored. Then the user is noticed, the user is engaged, and ultimately the user is a partner. Most maturity models have between 3 and 5 levels. Less than 3, and it might take long to reach the next level, and this could be demotivating for staff. If you have more than 5 levels, the distinction between the levels tend to get blurry. 4 levels work the best for us. And we specifically designed the maturity model so that an individual, a business unit, and the organization as a whole can use it. In this slide, you have the 4 levels and a brief description in terms of understanding, leadership, skills and learning, and process. In other words, those 4 key aspects of implementing plain language as a strategic priority. Here you have the grid of labels on the left, vertically and horizontally, the aspects. Remember the last 4, know the users, customize, test, and improve. They all link together as the process aspect. For each aspect, we will now have to determine the maturity level. To do this, you need first of all a set of indicators for each aspect at each level. We've developed these indicators from scratch, but they come from many years of experience as plain language practitioners working with a range of organizations. And they also draw on the experience of other plain language practitioners, as they have shared it in presentations and articles. I'm not going to read all the indicators. You can read through them in your own time. Again, you need to decide if you agree with these indicators or if you would add or change any indicator. We start off with the first key aspect, understanding. You've got your 4 maturity levels, and for each maturity level, there are the associated indicators, which would indicate that understanding is at this particular level. Now let's start with the lowest level, level 1. That's a situation where there's very little, almost no understanding of plain language and its value in the organization. That would be if the people in the organization think that plain language is the same as simple language. If they think that plain language is dumbing down for the disadvantaged or the uneducated, not for everyone. If they think that plain language cannot convey complex meaning. If a legal department thinks that contracts and policies in plain language will not stand up in court. If the people in the organization think that plain language is somehow vaguely linked to compliance, but they don't know the legislation and they don't know what and how they should comply. And if they think that plain language is just an expense to the organization. At the highest level, level 4, leadership and key communicators agree that plain language is vital to a customer-centered organization. They know the definition of plain language. They have a clear vision of the value that plain language adds to the organization. And they believe that plain language is an asset to the organization. The indicators for the next key aspect, leadership, work in the same way. So at level 1, you have indicators of this level. There's no common understanding of plain language in amongst your leaders. They do not buy into plain language. The leadership action is ad hoc or random, and action is reactive and problem driven. At the top end, at the top level, the plain language process is integrated into the business culture, brand and marketing, and the organization leads the industry in terms of plain language implementation. Skills and learning work in the same way, and so also the process aspects. First one here is know the users at level 1. It's not regarded as important. Communicators have some informal interaction with the content owners of the communication, and communicators develop communication as they see fit. They do not talk at all to end users. At the top level, there's a formal process to gather data on end users and owners. All findings are shared on a central database that's linked to the organization's customer database. All communication development draws on this database, and there's formal knowledge sharing. Customizing communication works in the same way. You've got your 4 levels and your indicators associated with each level. The same goes for monitor and measure. And lastly, for improving. Your 4 levels, maturity levels, and the indicators associated with each of these 4 levels. Next, you have to apply the indicators to determine how mature your organization is in terms of implementing plain language as a strategic priority. The first time you do this exercise, you will want to know from which level you will be starting. In other words, what is your baseline maturity? A communication audit would have given you a good idea of your baseline maturity. If your communication is rather ineffective, or you do not know how effective you are, your maturity level is probably low, might be even as low as level 1. On the other hand, if your communication already focuses on the end user and is quite effective, then your maturity level is probably higher and leans towards level 3 or level 4. From a low maturity level, it will take considerable time and effort to reach maturity in plain language. And it's important that especially your executive management understands that so that they don't have unrealistic expectations. From a high maturity level, you can expect relatively quick progress and results. Who will determine how mature your organization is in terms of plain language implementation? Who will decide at which level you are for each of these aspects? You can sit together and do a self-assessment, or you could bring in an independent assessor, either from inside your organization or from the outside. And what process should you follow to do this assessment? Well, you will need to translate the indicators into clear questions that are easy to answer. That, I can assure you, is a plain language exercise in itself. You also need evidence. For example, process documents, plain language style guide, user experience research findings, metrics, etc. Here is an example of 3 questions that unpack the maturity indicators for skills and learning. You will have to limit the number of questions because time is limited. I would recommend that you stick to questions that give you verifiable answers. So question 1 here is, does your organization have a plain language style guide? If yes, please provide the details. Where have you seen it? Do you use it? How do you use it and how useful is it? Then in the second column, there are possible answers. You might find that the possible answers that you have here are not exactly those that people give you, and then you might have to restructure them slightly. Associated with each possible answer is a level on the maturity model. And that also gives you a score. So for example, if you've said yes, there is a guide and the guide is visible in the business and the key communicators use it, then it would put you on level 3 on the maturity model, and that would also be the score for that question. The second question there is, have key communicators received any plain language training? If yes, please provide the details. Again, in the second column, there are some possible answers ranging from no and there's no training planned to yes. Plus, there's also a skills development program that has been developed for each individual key communicator. And then you would ask for the evidence. That would put that department or that individual or the organization at a level 4 on the maturity model, which would also be the score. The third question there, do you assess key communicators on plain language? The possible answers ranging from not applicable, that's if the score was a 0 for questions 1 and 2 up there, and to plain language is part of the KPIs of key communicators and therefore assessed each year. For that, you will also ask the person to provide evidence And if they can provide the evidence, it will put them or your organization on a level 4 in terms of the maturity model, and that would be their score. All that remains is then to add up the scores and map them on the maturity model as you see in this slide. The maturity map shows you the maturity levels for each key aspect. It also shows you the areas where the organization is doing well, like here, in understanding it's doing well, and the areas that need to be prioritized and improved. And in this example, the worst areas were testing usability and improving communication to make it more useful for users. Lastly, just a final note. A maturity model should be dynamic and not static. It should work for your organization, and therefore it should be revisited regularly, adapted and improved. Thank you, and have fun developing your own maturity model.